Hey everyone, let's dive into the fascinating world of the samurai, the legendary warriors of Japan. These elite soldiers, also known as bushi, first appeared in the 10th century and served until the 19th century. Renowned for their exceptional skills with the bow and sword, the samurai were a crucial part of Japanese armies during the medieval period. While samurai culture has been heavily romanticized since the 18th century, often seen as the pinnacle of honor and chivalry, there's no denying their incredible courage and loyalty. They were known to commit ritual suicide, or seppuku, if their master was defeated or killed. Despite this noble image, medieval Japanese warfare was as brutal as anywhere else, and many samurai fought primarily for financial gain. By the 17th century, with their military role diminishing, samurai often became important moral teachers and advisors in their communities. Now, let's talk about how the samurai developed and their status over time. After Japan ended its system of conscription in 792, private armies emerged during the Heian period to protect the interests of nobles who were often away at the imperial court. This was the birth of the samurai, a term that originally meant attendant and was more about class than military service. While there were other warrior classes, only the samurai were connected to serving the imperial court. Feudal lords, or daimyo, hired samurai to defend their territories, fight government-designated enemies, and combat hostile tribes and bandits. Samurai could live in barracks, castles, or their own homes. Over time, they organized into groups led by warlords with political power, eventually taking control from a weak imperial court in the 12th century under leaders like Minamoto no Yoritomo. From the Kamakura period onward, Japan was ruled by a military government led by a shogun, a system that lasted until the 19th century. Most samurai hailed from the Kanto Plain, having gained valuable experience fighting the Emishi tribes in the north. These battles helped shape their code of conduct, which allowed them to earn reputations and rise in status. Bravery was key, and samurai would often ride into battle loudly declaring their lineage and past deeds, challenging enemies to single combat. Eventually, these verbal boasts were replaced by banners. During the Edo period, a standardized system of status and rankings for samurai was established. There were three main ranks. Gokenin means the lowest rank, serving as vassals to feudal lords. Goshi means rustic warriors, allowed to farm their land but couldn't carry the two swords of full samurai. And Hatamoto means bannermen, the highest rank, expected to die defending their lord's interests. All samurai were supervised by their lords, but from 1180, the samurai dokor was established to monitor gokenin and discipline them when necessary. By 1591, samurai were no longer allowed to be both farmers and warriors, forcing them to choose one path to ensure greater loyalty to their masters. Many samurai had dedicated assistants called beishin, who also worked any land their master owned. Samurai made up just 5 to 6% of the population, around 18 million in 1600, and this group did not include women, although there was a small class of female warriors known as onabugeisha. From a young age, often around 10 years old or even earlier, samurai began rigorous training in martial skills. In the early medieval period, these warriors fought primarily on horseback, wielding a bow as their main weapon. When necessary, they also used a long, curved sword. They carried a second, shorter sword, and in 1588, a decree by ruler Hideyoshi stated that only full samurai could wear two swords, marking it as an important status symbol. In addition to mastering the bow and sword, samurai trained in various martial arts, 18 different forms during the Edo period. However, the most esteemed skills remained horsemanship, archery, and later, swordsmanship. From the 17th century onward, the sword eclipsed the bow as the quintessential samurai weapon. This shift occurred because bows became more affordable and accessible to ordinary foot soldiers, while the sword maintained its exclusivity and became known as the soul of the samurai. Both weapons reflected the samurai ideal that combat should involve personal duels. Bows, typically made from laminated bamboo strips around a wooden core, sometimes reinforced with cane, were lacquered for protection against rain. Arrow shafts were made from young bamboo, with iron or steel heads and bird feathers for stability. The typical arrow length in medieval times ranged from 34 to 38 inches. When firing from horseback, samurai used heavy wooden saddles with leather stirrups for stability, allowing them to stand while shooting. Samurai swords, curved and made of steel, date back to the 8th century in Japan. These swords were crafted by master craftsmen who carefully controlled the carbon content in various parts of the blade to maximize strength and flexibility. As a result, Japanese swords were among the finest and sharpest in the medieval world. Elite samurai often carried two swords, the longer katana with a blade around 60 cm and the shorter wakizashi with a blade around 30 cm. Both were worn with the cutting edge uppermost. The earlier tachi, a longer sword with a blade up to 3 feet, was worn with the cutting edge facing down and suspended from the belt. Sword handles were made of wood, covered in tough ray skin, and tightly bound in silk braid. A small circular handguard separated the blade from the handle. Samurai also carried a short dagger as a weapon of last resort. These weapons were kept in lacquered scabbards, which could be highly decorative. Early samurai also used weapons later associated with ordinary infantry, such as the spear and polearm. The yari's length varied, but its double-edged blades measured from 12 to 29 inches. Some yari blades were L-shaped to hook enemy riders from their horses. Unlike other cultures, Japanese warriors didn't typically throw spears but used them to jab at the enemy. The naginata had a long pole measuring 120 to 150 cm with a curved single-edged blade up to 60 cm. This versatile weapon was used to sweep, cut, and thrust at enemies and was particularly taught to samurai daughters as part of their martial arts training. Gunpowder weapons were introduced to Japan through contact with China, but it was the arrival of Europeans in the mid-16th century that truly brought firearms into Japanese warfare. By the end of that century, about 1/3 of field armies were equipped with guns, such as the matchlock arquebus, and some later samurai even carried pistols. And samurai armor has a long history, dating back to the Kofun period, when cuirasses were made from metal plates stitched together and protected by lacquer. Over time, armor evolved to be more flexible, using narrow strips of bronze or iron held together with cord or leather ties. Leather plating was also common, being both light and flexible. During the Heian period, samurai often wore a silk cloak called a horo over their armor while riding. This cloak fastened at the neck and waist, inflating with passing air to either deflect arrows or act as an identifier. Samurai armor came in various forms. The oyoroi, a box-like suit, hung from the shoulders and weighed around 30 kilos. The more flexible haramaki suit featured a close-fitting cuirass for the torso and a short skirt made up of 8 sections. Thighs were protected by guards, lower legs by greaves, and hands and forearms by half-armored sleeves. When firearms appeared on the battlefield, solid chest plates became popular, often imported or copied from Europe. Curiously, despite all this protection, samurai did not protect their feet, wearing only socks and simple rope sandals. A samurai's helmet was typically made from riveted iron or steel plates, forming a skull cap with flaps for extra protection at the sides and neck. Sometimes, a face mask with fierce features and sculpted mustaches was worn. Some helmets had impressive crests, like crescents, horsehair plumes, or animal horns and antlers, though these were usually worn by daimyo. For comfort under the helmet, samurai often shaved the front portion of their hair, a fashion that emerged in the 16th century. The rest of their hair was worn long and tied at the back in a bun or a 3 times folded cylinder. In battle, samurai would let their hair down, quite literally. Their armor and helmets indicated their rank, division, and home region through colored stitching, heraldic badges, and painted symbols, some of which were associated with their families or military house. Dragonflies, for instance, were a popular symbol on armor, representing the samurai's no-retreat mentality since the insect cannot fly backward. Banners were also used on the battlefield to identify samurai, with their size linked to the samurai status. And the bushido, or way of the warrior, is the famous code of conduct the samurai followed. Compiled in the late 17th century by scholar Yamago Soko, this code came into being when samurai were no longer active militarily and had become more like moral guides and advisors. Thus, it's challenging to determine how much chivalry samurai actually practiced throughout their history. Likely, like any warriors, pragmatism often ruled the day in battle. Samurai undoubtedly displayed great courage and martial expertise, but they also frequently violated promises and truces, burned villages and slaughtered the defeated. Honor came from victory and nowhere else. Financial gain and social advancement were primary motivators, leading to practices like collecting the severed heads of their victims. Despite their chivalrous reputation, mass defections during battles were not uncommon. For instance, at the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, no fewer than 5 generals in their army switched sides mid-battle. Samurai were not always noble in their treatment of peasants either. European visitors reported samurai beheading strangers on the roadside to test their swords, a gruesome habit known as tsujijiri, or cutting down at the crossroads. Samurai had the law on their side, granted the right by the Tokugawa shogunate to kill anyone of lower rank if they considered that person to be acting rudely or in an unexpected manner. And for samurai, honor was paramount, and the ultimate expression of this was seppuku, or self-disembowelment. When defeat was imminent, the honorable choice was to take one's own life rather than face capture. This gruesome act involved a samurai donning a white robe, a symbol of purity, and then using a knife to cut his abdomen from left to right. The stomach was believed to contain the spirit, making this a deeply symbolic act. Because seppuku was neither quick nor painless, an assistant known as a keishakunin was usually on hand to decapitate the samurai swiftly and thus end his suffering. In addition to individual seppuku, there was a practice known as junshi, or death by following, where followers and retainers were expected to kill themselves upon the loss of their master. This was seen as the ultimate display of loyalty. And among the many samurai heroes in Japanese mythology, Minamoto no Yoshitsune stands out. Born Ushiwakamaru in 1159, Yoshitsune was the younger brother of the shogun and a successful general in the Genpei War. His legendary status comes from his embodiment of the loyal, honorable, and unflappable warrior. As a youth, Yoshitsune was taught fencing and became famous for ridding the countryside of robbers and compelling the warrior monk Benkei to become his loyal servant. He led many successful battles, including a notable cavalry charge at Ikanatani and a daring leap across a boat bridge at Danaora. However, his success and popularity aroused his brother's jealousy, forcing Yoshitsune to flee to northern Japan. Disguised and aided by Benkei, he passed through border controls, but eventually the shogun found and besieged him in a castle, which was burnt to the ground. Some myths suggest Yoshitsune escaped and later became Genghis Khan. His story has become a staple of kabuki and no theater. And one of the most famous real-life samurai tales is that of the 47 Ronin, an episode of mass seppuku that epitomizes maintaining honor through death. In January 1703, the Lord of Akko, Asano Naganori, was insulted by Kira Yoshinaka, the shogun's chief of protocol. Naganori drew his sword, committing a capital offense within the castle walls, and was ordered to commit seppuku by the shogun. Naganori's 47 loyal samurai followers, now Ronin, means masterless samurai, vowed to avenge their master. After biding their time for 2 years, they finally decapitated Yoshinaka and placed his head on Naganori's grave. The Ronin were given the choice of execution or seppuku, and 46 Choseppuku, thus securing their place in history as the ultimate followers of the samurai code. They were buried beside their master at the Sengakuji Temple, and the importance of the samurai diminished significantly with the stabilizing policies of the Tokugawa shogunate, which brought relative peace to Japan. As warfare became less frequent, many samurai transitioned to roles as teachers, administrators, and moral guides. They still enjoyed elevated social status, but their role as warriors faded. In 1872, conscription was reintroduced, and by 1876, the samurai class was formally abolished. Descendants of samurai retained the title of shizoku until World War II. Samurai and their exploits became popular subjects in gunkamono or warrior tales during the 14th and 15th centuries, nostalgically recalling earlier times. The 18th century saw an even greater romanticization of the samurai, exemplified by the Hagakure by Yamamoto Tsunetomo, which boldly declares, "Bushido is a way of dying." Today, the legacy of the samurai endures through comic books, computer games, and other media, ensuring their status as one of the great warrior groups in world history.